Alright, this will be a bit off the cuff. I accidentally stopped my recording. Where I have rolled random words in my head and I picked Debian. And we've talked a bit about Debian, but I haven't made a full Debian video, you know? So when we're talking about these new Linux users that need a distribution, right? One of the things that'll come up is we'll have people will say, distribution doesn't matter, it's all desktop, right? And of course, this isn't true if you're recommending something like, Fedora versus Arch versus Gentoo versus Debian versus whatever the fuck else is out there, Void, whatever you're recommending to somebody. I don't know what you recommend to people, but or Slackware or something. These distributions actually act a lot differently. The reason why people say that distro hopping is just DE hopping is because their version of distro hopping is switching from Ubuntu to Kubuntu, or from like Linux Mint Cinnamon to Linux Mint Mate or LXDE or whatever, whatever they have going on there. So, but let's talk specifically about Debian, right? Because I don't usually recommend stock Debian to people, and this had happened. I believe it was a long time ago, and this was back when Debian was actually fairly difficult for me to install. And the main problem it had was Debian was the one distribution at the time, for the most part, that just did not ship any non-free anything at all. You could get it, but it was kind of hard to do. You had to like patch in your own like Wi-Fi drivers and stuff, and that was really annoying since I had a laptop back then. I didn't like that. Ubuntu packaged all that shit in, and most other distributions did too. But what Debian would do eventually is they would make it so you could get a ISO, and the default ISO had this non-free firmware in it. Which honestly, like, I don't care how much you're into, like, totally free hardware design, I mean, we could talk about the Stallman's ideas on free hardware design, but for the most part, we live in modern society, and mainly the big driver for this is GPU and Wi-Fi manufacturers. For some reason, they just don't want to play ball with open source, or even if it is open source, they don't want to, like, provide their firmware for free. For Wi-Fi, I don't really get it, but whatever, I don't really give a shit. I can always install non-free firmware if I need it, or I can go out and buy a little USB thing, a little nub for my computer that runs on Linux Libre, which is something I do a lot for Linux computers. Is I'll hook up a little nub, and it'll. So if I don't have Wi-Fi or my Wi-Fi doesn't work, I'll have something that I know works with Wi-Fi and it's got a kernel driver. Super easy. You can pick one up online for $10. You can even get like a 2-pack of them a lot of the time. It's super easy. But Debian, Linus Torvalds had once done a conference, and you've probably seen this conference, where it was asked, have you installed Debian before? And he said no, and it's because he tried one time and it was like really a pain in the ass to install. And so rightfully they said, oh well, we've changed it over the years and it's not as pain in the ass to install anymore. But even as somebody who does a lot of bootstrap installs, for some reason I hate the ncurses installer. I don't know what it is about it. It freaks me out or something. Like, it just fucks with my brain. And I just absolutely hate using the Debian installer. It always feels like something's going to go wrong and I'm not going to be able to fix it, basically. Even though I'm somebody who has done a sysvinit install of Debian with no systemd, from the installer, and gone out of the installer and fucked around with it and got back into it. I can do all that, but for some reason, I just hate the idea of using ncurses as my installer. I've used TUI installers like Omarchy and whatever, but Debian, for some reason, I can't recommend that to a new user. Like, they need a real installer. Like, this ncurses shit ain't gonna work for me. At least as far as recommending it to a new user. So, but that isn't really a huge difference between something like Linux Mint, Ubuntu, and Debian. The big differences are the release cycle and the feature set. And so, as well as a lot of QoL shit that Ubuntu's done that Linux Mint has inherited. So I don't know if you've heard this about Linux Mint, but they are trying to rebase to Debian. But what they're doing is they have an Ubuntu Mint, And what they're doing is over time, they are trying to basically replicate all of the changes that Ubuntu has made to Debian that they actually like. And they are trying to port Ubuntu over to Debian basically and rebase entirely. It's taking longer than expected, and that is why I say if you think that these are just minimal changes, it's not true. Ubuntu has done so much shit under the hood, good shit too. It's not like it's not all bad. It's not all snaps and whatever the fuck else they're doing. Mirror or something, whatever. I mean, Mirror could be okay, but it's not all the bad buggy shit that you've come to expect from Ubuntu. Mint is trying to rebase because they also don't like, if I remember, it's because they also don't like the changes Ubuntu is making and they don't want to keep rebasing or basing on Ubuntu. But we'll see how that goes for them. LMDE should be daily drivable at this point, so if you want to run that, go right ahead. I think they've done enough changes where you probably won't notice a difference. And that's what I always tell people, like, if you give grandma a computer, right? You could give grandma a computer with like Arctics on it, she'd have no idea she's running Arctics. You just might have to update it for her. Same thing with Dev1. She doesn't know what an init system is. She doesn't care what an init system is. Same thing with like Ubuntu. If Ubuntu switches to utils, the Rust core utils over GNU utils, Grandma doesn't give a fuck. She doesn't use all these like super obscure features and bug for bug compatibility that's in GNU utils. That she doesn't need that. She just needs her core utils to do core util things. Basically manage her system or run her command set, whatever it is. So, but I can recommend. I still hate recommending Ubuntu. It has its uses, especially for accessibility. It does have a purpose. Still, it's not like I'm saying like fuck Ubuntu. Just don't ever use it. And the forums are a big feature of that. But PPAs are probably the big selling point of Ubuntu over Debian. Now you might think to yourself, "Oh, it's a PPA, but Debian's compatible with PPAs. Why are you saying it's not?" And the reason is you'll have to look up the Don't Break Debian page on their wiki. It'll talk about not making a Franken Debian. And what that means is trying to install Ubuntu packages onto Debian because their release cycle is different. If I remember, I don't know if it's quite like this because of the source I had for this may have been full of shit. But if I remember, Debian releases their LTS, and then like halfway through the cycle, Ubuntu releases their LTS, and then from that point onward, Ubuntu's LTS is halfway ahead of Debian's LTS. And so you have reasonably newer packages sometimes, or sometimes you have even older packages, but there's also like Debian testing and stuff. I don't like the idea of using Debian testing or unstable. I know you can use it, but I've had so many problems with it. Like, testing is if you want to play God, and unstable is if you have a God complex, basically. That's my analogy for that. So when we're running Debian, it doesn't have the noob friendly installer, doesn't have the PPAs. It has really, really, really old software, like really old. And for a lot of people, I hear them saying, oh, I want to file a bug report. And I say, well, check your version first because you are running Ubuntu or Debian or whatever it is you're running. Check to see that your version's up to date. And they'll file the bug report, and then the report will come back. The project, owner will say, "Oh, just update your version. That was fixed like 10 versions ago." And that's why I call it Debian stale rather than Debian stable. And I call it stale because security is not the only bugs you have. Technically, all bugs can be considered security issues in some way, like a crash or whatever can be considered a security issue. But their terms of security are very strict, where it's like exploits, basically. So I noticed when I was using Debian, I actually had a fairly buggy experience even on Debian stable. I wasn't using testing, I wasn't using unstable, but I may have actually had a better experience on testing. And the reason is because even my desktop, it was just constant crashes over and over and over again because the KDE version I was using was out of date. And what happens is Debian technically supports all of these different desktop environments, but when you get down to it, the ones that they really support are GNOME. And that's basically it. It's just that XFCE, LXQT, LXDE, Mate, those don't update very often. So they don't really have any trouble being a Debian stable. But something like a KDE or GNOME, they have to be constantly updated. And so Debian's GNOME version is actually reasonably up to date for the most part. And so is Ubuntu's. I was actually using it because it was a few versions behind, like Fedora. And why I needed that was because extensions break every GNOME update, and I was using a shitload of extensions that I couldn't be a fuck to like chase down every maintainer and make sure that their shit's up to date. You know. So yeah, when we're doing Debian, I'm like, okay, this isn't really as noob friendly as I thought it would be. I don't really get it's not even really very useful for me, so why am I going to recommend it to somebody else? Contrary to that, I don't have problems with Linux Mint because my software is generally a little bit better up to date when using Ubuntu over Debian. It's not perfect. Like now, I just use Artix because like I want the packages bleeding edge. I want them up to date. I want the latest greatest. But Debian is just way in the opposite direction. Like I could get away with Fedora. Fedora is at a decent enough point release where I could run that pretty easily. But Gentoo was just way too far behind too. And I know you can slot your package and you can install whatever version you want, but I was having to unmask fucking everything, and that got really annoying to fuck with over and over and over again. And if I did unmask everything so I could get the latest version, where I was trying to, you don't get the Arch experience, contrary to what Mental Outlaw said. But I wanted something closer to upstream, and I found that when you started doing that, that the patches weren't good, and you end up breaking shit. So that wasn't going to work either. So I ended up switching to Artix because that's actually meant to be run bleeding edge. But Debian's like way, way too far in the opposite direction. Ubuntu I found isn't quite as bad, and it's just because of the way their repositories work. A lot of the things packaged for Ubuntu are generally a bit more up to date, depending on the release cycle. But although now everything's a snap, which is kind of kind of annoying. But you got Linux Mint, and Linux Mint helps with that. So you won't get the latest software, but if you're like me and you run a lot of stuff that gets updated a lot, especially major feature updates, look into something newer. Look into a Fedora or something. Debian's probably not your best bet, but we're gonna go with people who actually want a super stable desktop experience. I don't feel like it does that either. And the reason why is because they don't backport the bug fixes in the software. So it's good as a server operating system, it's good as a container, it's good as if your desktop usage is very minimal, like your Andrea Borman or something, you can get away with it. It's not, and a lot of people do love Debian even as a desktop operating system, and it is usable for that depending on your use case. But when I'm recommending distros to new users, I have trouble recommending Debian because I'm like, you're gonna run into these problems just like I did. You're gonna start running into software where you want it to be a bit more up to date. You're gonna run into those PPAs that you want to install because the Debian repos aren't like the Arch repos. It's not like Havoc the AUR. It's not like this is not the same. So I'm like, just use Linux Mint because not only does it have the installer, it has the out-of-the-box desktop environment that's well updated, and it's their desktop environment, and it works really well. And they have the PPAs, and they have all these features I want. They don't have the crap from Ubuntu. Even LMD, you could probably run LMD, but I don't feel comfortable recommending Debian to people. And obviously, people will show up in the comments saying, "Oh, I run Debian, it's fine." And it's like, yeah, it probably is fine. People can run the old LTS of Pop! OS just fine, but not me. I can't do it, and I can't recommend it to new people. So that's kind of where I'm coming from when I think about why we're recommending Mint over stock Debian, why we're recommending an Ubuntu-based distribution over stock Debian. And that's really why. Those are the main reasons I've come up with are it needs to have that new user experience. It needs to have those features, just to make it a bit more convenient for the end user. And that's kind of where I'm at. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye.